right, first graders. Now, since we've been looking over contractions and we've had some time to look over the most common contractions, the N apostrophe T contractions, we're going to go ahead and look at some other contractions that are found in writing. Now, first we're going to look at one of my favorite books called City I Love by Lee Bennett Hopkins. And this is a book of poetry. And while I read a couple of these poems to you, I want you to take some time and listen and see if you can find the contractions in these poems. And then we'll look at the contractions and see if we can find out what words are being expanded and contracted. Now, the first poem that I'd like to look at is called Sing a Song of Cities. Sing a song of cities. If you do, cities will sing back to you. They'll sing in subway roars and rumbles. People laugh, machine loud grumbles. Sing a song of cities. If you do, cities will sing back. Cities will sing back to you. Now, while we look back over this poem and see if we can find contractions, the first thing we're going to look for is the most telltale sign of contractions, which is the apostrophe. Now, if we look through this poem, the first thing that I see that has an apostrophe is going to be this word right here, veil. Now, we're going to take our dry erase board and we're going to look at the word veil and see if we can figure out what words are being contracted. So we'll take our dry erase board and we're going to write the word veil. Now, if we remember what we've learned so far about contractions, we know that in a contraction, the first word is going to stay the same. Now, if we look at this word and look for a word that looks familiar, we see that the first word in this contraction is what? The word they. Now, since we know in contractions that the first word stays the same, we know that this contraction starts with the word they. Now, since there's an apostrophe here, we know that that means that something is missing. So in order to find out what word is missing, we'll go back to the poem. When we go back to the poem, we can look for context clues to see what the apostrophe LL stands for. Now, if we read the sentence before our contraction, cities will sing back to you, we know that we're talking about cities. Cities will sing back to you. They'll sing in subway roars and rumbles. So we know that they refers to cities. And if we look back, it says cities will, then we can figure out that they'll probably means they will. So we'll go back to our board. And since we know that the apostrophe means that something is missing, we know that after they, we're missing another word. So we'll take this away. And after looking back at our context clues, we realize that the word we're missing is will. So now we know that they'll is contracted into, that they will is contracted into they'll. So we can write that down. And now we know that these mean the same thing. So now we're going to take a look at another poem. And first graders, when I read this poem, I want you to see if you can find the contraction. The next poem is called From the Ground. Look, up there, high up there, where men and women building the new skyscraper balance on beams, dangle on derricks, glide on girders, sway on concrete slabs. Amazing, breathtaking, wondrous. Why, it's like watching a razzle-dazzle, razzmatazz, three-ring steel circus performance appearing in the sky. So, boys and girls, when we look back at the poem, we know that the first thing we're going to look for when trying to find the contraction is an apostrophe. As we look back over the poem, the only word we can find that has an apostrophe is this word, it. So now we're going to take our dry erase board and we're going to write our contraction, it. I-T apostrophe S. It. Now, we know from looking at contractions that when we have a contraction, the first word stays the same. So first graders, if we look at this word, we can see what word that looks familiar. We know that the first word in the contraction is the word it. So now that we know that the first word is it, we can look at the apostrophe S, and we know that that means that something is missing. So we will go back to our poem and look and see if we can find some context clues that will give us an idea of what the apostrophe S stands for. So if we read the sentence again, why, it's like watching a razzle-dazzle, razzmatazz, three-ring steel circus. So when we look at the word it, we can guess that it probably means it is. So if we check to make sure that makes sense, we say, why, it is like watching a razzle-dazzle, razzmatazz, three-ring steel circus. So we know that in the case of it, the apostrophe S stands for is. So we can go back and get rid of the apostrophe in the S, since we know that something is missing, and now we know that the word is missing. So we know that it is the same as it is. It's just a shorter way to say it. All right, boys and girls, now that we have had a chance to look at some different cases of contraction, we're going to make a contraction bug. Now, I'm going to help you do this one, and then you will get to do your own. So, if we remember back to the first contraction that we found in our poems, we remember that we found the word veil. So we're going to write that in the first spot on our contraction bug. Now, if we remember back to our story and our context clues, we remember that the first word in the contraction is the word they. So we're going to put that in the first leg under the word they'll, since that's the first word. And if we remember back to the story, we remember that they was the cities. And we know that in the poem they said the cities will. So we know that they'll means they will. So we're going to write the word will in the second leg of our contraction bug. So now we have our first contraction, they will. Now if we remember back to the second contraction that we looked at the word it. So we're going to put the word it in the second spot on our contraction bug. Now, if we remember back to the story and our rules on contractions, we know that in contractions, the first word doesn't change. So we know that we have already seen the word it, and since it's before the apostrophe, it doesn't change, so that's the first word on our leg of our contraction bug. So we will write in the word it. And now we can remember that when we read back to our poem, we found out that it stands for it is. So we're going to put the second word of our contraction, is, into the second leg of our contraction bug under it. Now that we've had a chance to make our contraction bug, and we have something to look at to remember these contractions, everybody's going to get a chance to make one.